I was watching the news the other day, and one of the experts said, in order to defeat the coronavirus, what we need is we need to have a new Manhattan Project. Do you know what the Manhattan Project was? Well, it was back in World War II. Einstein, who was the genius with the big hair, he went to visit the president, President Roosevelt, and he said, listen, I've got a secret. It's possible to build an atomic bomb. What you do is you split the atom, it causes a chain reaction, and it will blow up an entire city. It's a really big bomb, and we need to build one. The reason is the Nazis are trying to build one. And if they build one before we do, we're going to be in big trouble. So Roosevelt believed him, and he said, okay, let's do something. And he launched the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, that was the code name for this top secret project. What he did is he got the top scientists, the smartest guys. He sent them over to Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he quarantined them there. It's really hard to be quarantined, but they were quarantined there, and they worked together, put their minds together, and they came up with the atomic bomb, and the rest is history. Well, you and I are facing the coronavirus, but we're also facing a virus which is 1 billion times worse than the coronavirus, and that's the virus of sin. And it causes death, it causes destruction, and it's infected all of mankind. Now, we have the ultimate victory because Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. And when we believe in him and we call out to him, he washes us white as snow. He forgives our sins once for all. And we're going to be in heaven with him. He has won the war. But in this life, we are still going through the battle. We are fighting a battle here with sin, and sin is destroying us. Sin is killing, stealing, and destroying us, and I want us to overcome. I want us to have the victory. So what I'm proposing for us today is that you and I, we start our own Manhattan Project, a spiritual Manhattan Project. And we get together in prayer. Even though we're separated by social distancing, we can still get together in prayer. And I want you to join with me. I want us to start praying. I'm starting a sermon series right now called the Spiritual Manhattan Project. The Spiritual Manhattan Project. And today I'm going to be giving some really practical things for us to fight against sin. And then I'm going to start talking about some spiritual things, spiritual warfare. And then I'm going to start talking about prophecies a couple weeks from now, prophecies that have to do with what's going on right now. And then finally, I'm going to bring out the nuclear option, and we're going to talk about revival and awakening happening right here. I want us to have the victory in our lives, in our homes, in the city, in the state, in this country, in this world. I want us to have a great awakening. We're going to start the Spiritual Manhattan Project. Well, the first thing I want to tell you is that sin is a problem. And we each are attacked by our own special sin that hates us and that we so easily give into. Think about Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. It says, let's set aside every hindrance, and especially the sin that so easily besets us, and let's run with endurance the race that God has set before us. So we are all overcome by a terrible sin. The devil knows our weakness. It's different for each one of us, but we've got to learn how to fight it. And I'm going to give you the 2 R's today, which is a very practical thing for you to deal with fighting with sin. It's not going to be what you expect. The 2 R's: reroute and retreat. Reroute and retreat. Now you might think, well, what does that have to do with fighting a war against sin? Well, sometimes you need to reroute and retreat. Let me start talking about rerouting. It's a biblical concept. I'm going to give you a Bible verse. Matthew chapter 6, verse 13. Jesus has given us the Lord's Prayer. Now, you know how it starts. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And Jesus is giving this model prayer about how for us to pray. These aren't words that we just have to repeat, but this is a way we should pray. We should start off by praising God for who he is. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Well, down on in the prayer, then he says, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Jesus is saying, we need to pray, Lord, reroute us. Help me, lead us not into temptation. Help me to take a route, to take a path where I don't run head on into temptation. In sports, sometimes it's important to maneuver. It's important to maneuver and outflank your opponent. When a wide receiver in football is going to go out for a pass, he doesn't just run straight into the opposing player. No, he maneuvers, he outflanks the opponent, he gets out into the open field, he catches the ball and makes a touchdown. You do not want to run straight into problems, and that's what Jesus says, deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation. You want the Lord to lead you away from the temptation. You need to learn how to reroute. If you run headlong into every single problem, it's going to wear you out, and you're just going to end up with a headache. But you need to know this principle of rerouting. Let me give you a very practical example, and this, maybe you say this doesn't apply to you, because like I said, everybody's got that sin that we easily give into. And there was a pastor that I heard speak one time, and he was famous. He'd go around and preach at big conferences, and so, but he'd stay in hotels. And he said, what I do is I reroute when I go into the hotel. He said, because what I found is I'll sit down in a hotel, and I'm tired from the day. I'm not really thinking about what's going on, and I just turn on the TV and I'll start flipping through the channels. And in some hotels, they have some bad channels. And I'd actually accidentally end up on one of those bad channels, and I'd start watching, I'd start thinking about things, I'd start watching things I shouldn't watch that I knew were wrong. Jesus said, if you look at a woman lusting after her, you have committed adultery in your heart. And he said, I don't want to commit adultery. I don't want to think about bad things. I'm out here serving God. I'm running that race, but I'm being easily beset by this temptation. So you know what he would do when he'd go into a hotel room? He said, the first thing I do is I unplug the TV. I unplug the TV, and then I'm too lazy to go plug it back in. I lay down and I fall asleep. I read the Bible, I have time to study the things I need to study, and I make phone calls I need to make, and I get so much more done, and I'm not tempted. I rerouted what I did. Now, you might be saying, hey, that's crazy. I mean, that's really silly. You're not able to control yourself when you watch the TV. And he said, no, what I want to do is I want to reroute. I know what brings me down. I know what sin easily besets me, and I'm going to go and I'm going to reroute. Let me give you another example. Billy Graham. If you don't know who Billy Graham is, he was probably the greatest evangelist of the past century. He went out and preached to so many people. And when he first got started, there were some journalists that wanted to bring him down really fast. They didn't want him to be a success. Well, he held a big crusade in Atlanta. This was his first big crusade in Atlanta, and tons of people came. Lots of people got saved. It was so successful. But the journalists wanted to bring him down. So you know what they said? They printed, and this is in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, they put a picture of Billy Graham there preaching from the crusade, and then right next to him they put a big picture of tons of money, buckets full of money, because they took up an offering during the crusade. Cost a lot of money to pay for the stadium and everything. They took up a lot of money, and they were trying to tell everybody, Billy Graham loves money. Billy Graham's just in this for the money. And so Billy Graham said, this is not going to work, because I'm not in it for the money. I want people to get saved. And he was just getting started off, and it was already going to be a scandal, and he didn't want this. And at the same time, there were a lot of preachers who were having affairs and getting into a lot of trouble and having scandals. And he said, I don't want any part of that. So they were in Modesto, California at the time. He and his leadership team, they got together and prayed and said, we are going to make the Modesto Manifesto. The Modesto Manifesto. And what it's going to be some rules that we're going to make so we can reroute the way we do things. One thing, I'm not going to have anything to do with money. I'm going to have a board that completely takes care of the money, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. That board's going to take it, and they're just going to pay me a salary, like any pastor gets paid, just a normal salary. And about the problem with people having affairs, I'm never going to be alone with a woman who's not my wife. I'm not going to go out to eat alone. I'm not going to be in the car alone. I'm not going to be alone with a woman who's not my wife, because I don't want to be tempted. I don't want them to be tempted, and I don't want them to accuse me of anything. I don't want to even have the appearance of evil. I don't want to have a scandal. And let me tell you, it worked out for Billy Graham. He said that was one of the successes of my ministry, because I had this Modesto Manifesto. Now, a lot of people laugh at that. In fact, there was a governor in a state north of here who... an ex-governor, a former governor, and he said that's what he does. He never is alone with a woman, and the people laughed at him so much. The journalists laughed at him like it was his idea. He made this thing up. Billy Graham did it long before, and it's smart, and it's wise, and you might laugh at it and say, well, you can't control yourself, you can't be alone with a woman. No, he's rerouting. Lead us not into temptation. Help me to avoid evil. And the people laughed at it. You know why the devil laughs at it? Because the devil wants to bring you down, and he knows how to bring you down. He wants you to have a scandal. He wants you to get accused of things. He wants for you to give in to that temptation, that sin that so easily besets you. He doesn't want you to run the race, and so you got to learn how to reroute. It's part of being successful. Jesus said that there is a wide road, a broad road that many people go down. It's no big deal. Let's all just go down this road. But Jesus said there's a narrow road and few people find it. You've got to reroute and get on that narrow road. So I'm telling you how to deal practically with temptation to fight this battle. I gave you the 2 R's. The first one is reroute. The second one is retreat. Now that's hard, retreat. Who wants to retreat? How does that have anything to do with the battle? But there are some times you need to retreat. You need to stop and you need to put it in reverse and turn around. Now, I don't like to get directions. I don't know if it's a man thing. I've never seen any studies on this, but that's the stereotype, that males do not like to ask directions. And back in the old days, before we had GPS, you'd be driving, and I would hate to turn around, and so I would think, well, we're going to we'll take a left up here and get back where we're supposed to go. And I'd waste hours going the wrong direction. And if I could have just stopped and asked directions, I would have saved a whole lot of time. It's nice with GPS now. If you go the wrong way, it'll just reroute for you, and you can just keep on going. But it didn't used to be that way. Sometimes you save time by going backwards. Sometimes you can make more progress forward if you'll take a few steps backwards. I know you can make a whole lot more progress if you'll be patient and wait for things in God's time instead of rushing ahead saying, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what's going to make me happy. When the truth is, if you'll wait and go the route that God wants you to go, then you'll get what you need on time, the right time. There are times you need to back up. There's times you need to back away. There's times you need to run away. Let me give you some examples from warfare. We talked about the Manhattan Project, which took place during World War II. If you go all the way back to the Revolutionary War, America was a colony, and we were not a very strong colony, and the people that were in charge of us was Britain. And Britain, I don't know if you know this, but back then they were a superpower. They were the superpower. They had the largest military in the world, and not only that, they had the best navy in the world. Well, they were fighting against us, and we were just a bunch of farmers. We did not have a chance. Down in the south of the United States, of the colonies, the British came in and they took Savannah, which was the capital of Georgia at the time, and Nathaniel Greene was the general of the colonial troops in the South. And he knew he couldn't fight the British. I mean, they took Savannah without a fight. There was no way he could fight them. So he decided, what I got to do is guerrilla warfare. I got to attack them, and then I got to run away. Because if I don't run away, they're going to defeat me. So he would attack, and the British came chasing him, and they chased him and his army all over South Georgia, all through South Carolina, through all the swamps down there, and they ended up winning the war, right? They weren't defeated. If they had gone head-to-head, they would have lost. But they learned it's time to retreat. They knew how to retreat. That is a principle. It was even worse up in the north. I want to tell you about George Washington, because Nathaniel Greene was in charge of the troops down south. Well, George Washington was in charge of the troops in the north. And he had it even worse. He was on Long Island, and he was facing the British Army. And he only had 10,000 soldiers. The British had 20,000. First day of fighting, 1,000 of his troops got captured. George Washington's troops, 300 died, 700 were wounded. He was about to lose the whole thing. And if his army lost here on Long Island, that would be the end of the war, because there was no more army. That was it. That was all he had available. It was all going to be over. And if he had lost, we'd be speaking with an English accent right now. So I'm so glad he didn't. Praise God, he didn't lose. But it looked like he was going to lose because he was fighting a superior army. So he knew he had to retreat. The problem was he had to retreat across in between Long Island and Manhattan. There's some kind of river. He's got to retreat across that river, and guess who's out waiting in the river? It's the British Navy. And they're going to blow the ships out of the water. I mean, the Army's bad, but the Navy's even worse, and they didn't have a chance. Well, nightfall came, and George Washington said, we got to go. We got to try to get across in our little boats. And so he started, and miraculously, there was a fog that covered the river, and they were able to sneak out right under the nose of the British, and they were able to fight another day. When you face temptation, you got to run away so you can fight another day. If you go head-to-head against the temptation, you are going to fail. That's not what you're supposed to do, and I've got a Bible verse that tells you that right here. Remember this verse. It's easy to remember. It's got a lot of twos in it. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22. It says, flee youthful lusts. That's what Paul was teaching to Timothy. Timothy was a young man. He said, flee youthful lusts. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22. You've got to learn to run away. When you're facing temptation, you need to run away. We don't run away from the devil. We stand up strong against the devil. We're going to talk about that next week. You stand against the devil. Someday we're going to see Jesus pick the devil up like a puny worm and cast him in hell. But you need to run from temptation. You know why you need to run from temptation? Because when you're fighting against temptation, you're fighting against yourself. And if you're fighting against yourself, you're going to lose because part of you wants to do what you're being tempted to do. In Romans chapter 7, Paul says, hey, I end up doing what I don't want to do. So you're wrestling with yourself. What you need to do is run, run, run. Don't hang around the temptation. Don't think you're strong enough. Run when you're facing temptation. That is the message we have here in the Bible, what you're supposed to do. You need to learn how to run. I gave you the 2 R's. You need to reroute. Lord, don't lead us into evil. Deliver me from the temptation and reroute, and you need to learn to retreat. You need to run. Joseph was a young guy, and he was a slave. He was nobody. And a lot of times when you think you're nobody, you say, well, I might as well sin because I'm nobody. What does it matter? But when you realize, like Hebrews 12 verse 1 says, we got to run the race. Set aside what hinders you. Set aside the temptation that easily besets you and run the race. When you realize you've got an important race to run, then you realize, hey, I need to avoid sin. I need to fight this thing. Joseph could have easily said, he was just a kid. He was a slave. He could have easily said, hey, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. It doesn't matter. My life's not important. But no, he believed in God, and he had a vision that he's going to do great things for God. He knew that was going to happen. So he was working at somebody's house, a rich guy's house. His name was Potiphar. And the man trusted Joseph very much. He was off doing business, and Potiphar's wife was there. And she was after Joseph. And she was tempting Joseph. And it would have been so easy for him to give in, because if he didn't give in, it was going to be bad for him, because who knows what the wife would do. I mean, she was his boss's wife. One day, she went and she grabbed him, and he took off running. He ran, and he ran, and he ran. And it was hard for him. He had to go a lot. He had to suffer a lot because he ran from the temptation, didn't give in it. But you know what happened? Through it all, God raised him up, so he was the second most powerful man in Egypt. And Egypt was the superpower at the time, so he really was the second most powerful man in the whole world. And because of his wisdom, he was able to save the world from crisis. We're going through a coronavirus crisis. We need some great leaders who love the Lord, who have wisdom, to help us in this time of crisis. And we're facing a great crisis of sin. The virus of sin is destroying mankind. We have the ultimate victory, but I'm challenging us to have a Manhattan Project right now to deal with the battle we're going through. So I'm asking you to join me, to start praying, Lord, let's have a great victory over sin here in my life, in my home, in my city, in my state, in my country, in this world. That's what we're praying for. God bless you.